My name is Nora Calloway. I'm 34 years old. And for 11 years I watched the man who destroyed my life sit 3 rows behind me. Same courtroom, same gray jacket every single hearing, while I stood in handcuffs being called a murderer. He never flinched. Not once. The detectives had my fingerprints. They had a witness. They had a story that made perfect sense, except none of it was true. What they didn't know was what I had. Something small. Something hidden. Something that would eventually collapse the entire case. But that took 11 years. Before I tell you what actually happened, if you're new here, please like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Now, let me take you back to the night everything changed, because nothing about what happened to me was an accident. It was a Tuesday. Ordinary in every way. I had essays to grade, a cup of tea going cold on my desk, and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. I ignored it. I shouldn't have. By 11 p.m., there were 3 police cars outside my house. They didn't knock gently. They didn't wait. The door opened and the cold came in before they did. One officer read my name off a notepad like it was already decided. Like the conversation was already over before it started. I asked what I'd done. Nobody answered. They walked me out in full view of my neighbors. No explanation. No warrant shown. Just hands on my arms and a car door closing behind me. At the station they showed me a photograph. A woman. Someone I knew. And they told me she was dead. Then they told me I did it. I sat in that plastic chair and the whole room tilted. Not because I was guilty. Because I suddenly understood someone had planned this. Carefully. Quietly. Long before that Tuesday night. And whoever it was, they were already gone by the time I realized I'd been set up. They had a file. A thick one. That was the first thing I noticed when the detective dropped it on the table. My name was on the cover. Inside, my fingerprints on a kitchen knife found 2 blocks from the victim's apartment. A text message I allegedly sent at 9:47 p.m. A neighbor who claimed she saw me leaving the building. 3 pieces of evidence. Neat. Packaged. Ready. Too ready. I had never been inside that apartment. The text was sent from my number, but I was in a staff meeting until 10 p.m. 12 witnesses. 12 people who saw me sitting in that room. The detective slid the text message across the table and tapped it twice. I told him about the meeting. He wrote something down and said nothing. That silence scared me more than anything else that night. Not anger. Not disbelief. Just a man writing in a notebook like my alibi was a minor inconvenience he'd already planned around. The fingerprints were the part one couldn't explain. That knife had never been in my hands. But my prints were on it. Someone had touched something I had touched. Transferred it deliberately. This wasn't careless. Whoever framed me, they knew exactly how evidence worked. Everyone left. That's the part people don't tell you about being accused. It doesn't happen slowly. It happens overnight. Friends stopped returning calls. Colleagues went quiet. My landlord left a voicemail asking about the lease. One person didn't leave. Her name was Claire. My younger sister. 29 years old, working 2 jobs, raising a kid alone. And she showed up to every single visitation without missing one. She didn't cry in front of me. She brought notebooks instead. First visit she came with 3 pages of questions. Dates. Names. Timelines. She sat across the glass and said 4 words. Walk me through everything. So I did. She wrote down the staff meeting. The 12 witnesses. The text sent from my phone while I was in that room. She circled the text message 3 times and underlined the timestamp. Then she asked me one question I hadn't thought to ask myself. Who had access to your phone that week? I stopped. Because there was someone. Someone who had borrowed it 2 days before the murder. Someone who handed it back without me thinking twice. Someone I trusted completely. Claire saw my face change. She leaned forward. Who was it, Nora? I told her. And the pen in her hand stopped moving. His name was Daniel Marsh. We'd worked together for 3 years. Same school. Same department. He borrowed my phone to call a parent. His battery was dead, he said. Handed it back 20 minutes later. I didn't think about it again. Until that moment across the visitation glass. Claire wrote his name down slowly, like she was being careful with it. She asked how well I knew him. I told her well enough to trust him. Not well enough, apparently. She left that day without saying much. For days later she came back with something that changed everything. Daniel Marsh had known the victim. Not casually. They had a history. A dispute over money, a shared apartment, a falling out that ended badly 8 months before her death. None of that was in the police file. None of it had been investigated. Claire had found it in 48 hours. The detectives had had months. I pressed my hand against the glass and asked her how she found it. She said she just started pulling threads. The victim's social media. Public records. A deleted post that wasn't fully deleted. One thread. That's all it took. And Daniel Marsh had been sitting in the third row of my first court hearing the week before. Nobody had noticed. Nobody had asked why. Claire didn't go to the police. Not yet. Because we both knew what would happen. A sister with a theory. No legal standing. No badge. They'd listen politely and file it nowhere. So she kept pulling. She found a woman named Priya. A former colleague of the victim. Someone who had watched the falling out between Daniel and the victim happen in real time. Priya had given a statement to police during the original investigation. Her statement was in the file. One paragraph. 3 sentences. Claire tracked her down anyway and sat across from her in a coffee shop for 2 hours. What Priya said in that coffee shop was nothing like those 3 sentences. She said Daniel had threatened the victim. Directly. Specifically. She said she told the detective exactly that, and watched him write down something completely different. Claire recorded the conversation. She came to visitation that week and didn't sit down. Just stood at the glass and held up her phone so I could see the screen. Priya's voice came through the speaker quiet but clear. I couldn't breathe. Not because of what Priya said. Because of what it meant. Someone hadn't just framed me. Someone had also walked into a police investigation and quietly dismantled it from the inside. This was never just about me. Year 2. Second appeal denied. I started counting the faces in the courtroom. Something to do with my eyes while the judge spoke. Families of victims sat left. Legal teams sat right. Public gallery filled the back. Daniel Marsh sat third row center. Every time. I hadn't noticed in year 1. I was too busy watching the judge. But year 2 I started watching everything else. And there he was. Same seat. Same jacket. Hands folded. Eyes forward. Not watching me. Watching the lawyers. Specifically, watching my defense attorney whenever she raised new evidence. His jaw would tighten. Just slightly. Gone in a second. But I saw it. I told Claire during visitation. She didn't dismiss it. She started attending hearings herself and sat 2 rows behind him. Third hearing she came to. Daniel arrived early, sat down and pulled out a small notebook. Every time my attorney spoke he wrote something. When the prosecution spoke the notebook stayed closed. Claire photographed 6 pages of that notebook from 2 rows back. We didn't know what the notes said. But we knew what they meant. He wasn't there to grieve. He wasn't there for closure. He was there to monitor how close we were getting. And by year 2 we were getting close enough to worry him. Year 5. Claire had a folder 2 inches thick. Priya's recording. Daniel's court attendance record. Every single hearing logged and dated. The deleted social media posts she'd archived. Financial records showing Daniel had borrowed money from the victim 6 weeks before her death. A loan that was never repaid. A loan the victim had apparently decided to pursue legally. Claire took it to a lawyer. The lawyer made 3 calls and came back with nothing. Inadmissible. Circumstantial. Insufficient for appeal. He used the word insufficient 4 times in one meeting. Claire called me that night. First time she ever cried on the phone. I listened. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I told her to go home, sleep, and not make any decisions before morning. She called again at 6 a.m. She'd found someone. An Innocence advocacy organization 2 states over. They'd taken cases with less. They had a forensic specialist who had dismantled evidence chains like mine before. I told her to send everything. 3 weeks of silence followed. The kind of silence that either means nothing is happening or everything is. I counted days on the wall. 8. Slept. Waited. Then a name landed on my desk through official correspondence. An attorney named Marcus Webb had agreed to review my case. The thread hadn't snapped. It had just found stronger hands. Marcus Webb didn't shake hands. He sat down, opened my file, and started reading before I finished introducing myself. 40 minutes. No interruptions. No questions. Just a man moving through 7 years of documents like he was looking for something specific. Then he closed the folder and looked up. He said 3 words. The knife bothers me. Not the text message. Not the witness. The knife. The one piece of evidence I could never explain. The one thing that had quietly haunted every appeal. He pulled out a single page. A forensic report from the original investigation. He pointed at a number. A measurement. The fingerprint ridge depth recorded on the knife handle. Then he pulled out a second page. My booking fingerprints taken the night of my arrest. The measurements didn't match. Not significantly. Not obviously. But enough. Enough for someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. The prints on the knife weren't taken from my hand directly. They were lifted from another surface and transferred. Someone had literally peeled my fingerprint off something else and pressed it onto that knife. Marcus tapped the page twice and said the forensic team that processed the original evidence had missed it. Or hadn't looked. I asked him which one he thought it was. He didn't answer. He just picked up his phone and started dialing. Marcus moved fast. He filed for independent forensic review within 2 weeks. The court granted it, reluctantly, slowly, but it granted it. First real legal ground we'd stood on in 7 years. Claire didn't celebrate. She went back to the courtroom. Because Daniel Marsh had changed. He still came to hearings. Same seat. But the notebook was gone. He sat with his arms crossed now. Eyes moving instead of staying forward. He started arriving late and leaving before proceedings closed. Claire noticed something else. He'd started parking different places. Never the same spot twice. She mentioned it to Marcus. Marcus made a call to an investigator he'd worked with before. A woman named Sandra Obi who had spent 14 years in financial crimes before going private. Sandra spent 3 days doing nothing but watching Daniel Marsh. On the 4th day she called Marcus with something nobody expected. Daniel had made 4 cash withdrawals in the 2 weeks following Marcus's forensic filing. Same amount each time. Small enough to avoid flagging. Consistent enough to be a pattern. He was paying someone. Sandra cross-referenced the withdrawal dates against the case timeline. Every single payment came within 48 hours of a new development in my appeal. He wasn't just monitoring the case anymore. He was actively working against it. And now, for the first time in 9 years, someone was building a file on him. I was in the prison library when it happened. A guard came in, said nothing, and handed me a folded note. Marcus Webb's handwriting. 4 words. They arrested him today. I read it twice. Then a 3rd time. Then I sat down on the floor right there between the shelves because my legs simply stopped working. Not relief. Not triumph. Something quieter and heavier than both. Sandra had taken everything to a federal investigator 6 weeks earlier. The fingerprint forensics. The cash withdrawals. The notebook photographs. Priya's recording. 9 years of Claire's documentation stacked into a single submission. The investigator had sat on it for 2 weeks. Then moved on it in 48 hours. Daniel Marsh was arrested at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday. At his kitchen table. Coffee still warm. Claire called the prison line 20 minutes after it happened. She wasn't crying. She was completely silent for a long time. Then she said, "It's done, Nora." I pressed the phone against my ear so hard it hurt. Outside the library window the yard looked exactly the same. Same concrete. Same fence. Same sky. But something had shifted underneath all of it. 9 years of weight that had been pressing down on one side of a scale had suddenly lifted. The truth had finally landed somewhere it couldn't be ignored. The exoneration hearing lasted 40 minutes. I stood in the same courtroom where it all started. Same wood paneling. Same fluorescent hum overhead. Different energy entirely. Marcus spoke for 12 minutes. The prosecution said almost nothing. The judge reviewed the forensic findings, Sandra's investigative report, Daniel Marsh's full financial trail, and Priya's recorded testimony. Then he looked up and said my name. Not as a convict. Just as a name. He said the words. Conviction vacated. Immediately. I heard them land but couldn't locate myself in the room for a second. Like the air had shifted pressure. The handcuffs came off for the last time at 11:23 a.m. on a Thursday. I walked through a door and Claire was standing on the other side. She didn't run. Neither did I. We just stood there for a moment looking at each other across 11 years of everything that had happened. Then she handed me a coffee. Still hot. I stepped outside and the sun hit my face and I stood still on the pavement and didn't move for a long time. People were talking around me. Cameras somewhere. Marcus shaking hands behind me. I wasn't thinking about any of it. I was thinking about the Tuesday night they walked me out in handcuffs past my neighbors. The essays on my desk. The tea going cold. 11 years for a Tuesday that was never mine. Daniel Marsh was convicted 14 months later. First-degree murder. Evidence tampering. Obstruction of justice. The judge read each charge slowly. I sat in the public gallery this time. 3rd row center. His seat. He didn't look back. The financial record showed he'd borrowed $11,000 from the victim. When she filed legal notice demanding repayment, he made one decision that cost him everything. He just hadn't planned on it costing him 11 years to actually pay for it. I didn't feel what I expected to feel watching that verdict land. No eruption. No release. Just a quiet recognition that the truth had finally found the right room. Claire sat beside me. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. I went back to teaching 8 months after walking out. Different school. Different city. First day I stood in front of a classroom and 23 faces looked back at me and I thought, this is what they took. Not just years. This specific moment. Repeated thousands of times. I still think about the gray jacket. 3 rows back. All those years. How easy it is to hide inside a system that isn't looking for you. How one person refusing to stop looking can eventually dismantle everything you built in the dark. Claire still has every notebook. Every photograph. Every page. Just in case anyone ever needs reminding that the truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone stubborn enough to find it.